Good evening and welcome to episode 2 of the Commander's Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman. For those of you first-time listeners and viewers, welcome. And for those of you who are returning after last week's debut episode, thank you as well. There is no shortage of talk, debate, headlines, stories surrounding the Washington Commanders, and that's what we tackle here every single week for you football fans. It's an honor and a pleasure to be part of the Out of the Box Sports Network. And this is the last show of the NFC East that started this year. And we're excited to continue this as we go through the season, but most importantly, training camp has started. So along with training camp, there's always stories off the field, on the field that just spark the fan debate like no other. One of the headlines going into this week was a debate about the new stadium. As everybody knows, FedEx Field is probably one of the worst stadiums in the league, not only from a pure physical stadium infrastructure, but also from the fan experience as well. One of the things that all of the owners, from Josh Harris down to Magic Johnson, Mark Ein, Mitchell Rales, has been a constant press of we are going to improve the fan experience. So what does that mean? It means they're going to be dumping money into everything. They are doing upgrades in all levels of the stadium, but with that also means that they need to start working on a new stadium deal. Why do they need to do that? Well, that's because the current lease at FedEx Field runs out in 2027. Doesn't sound like that far away, but it is only a mere 3 to 4 seasons away. That also means that a new stadium right now at this time cannot probably be built in that time frame. So there's a couple options. The biggest thing right now is, now that the new ownership group has taken over in DC with the Josh Harris group, every jurisdiction, local jurisdiction here in the DMV, is now battling for that coveted title of where the Commanders are going to call home. They currently play in Landover, Maryland, which is Prince George's County, just outside the Beltway. Well, actually, I guess just inside the Beltway. And that is the current home, where it's been since 1994-ish, 1998. So one option is that they stay there. The other option that's been floating around is whether they go back to RFK, which is located in our nation's capital. The glory days of the old Washington Redskins, before they moved out to FedEx Field in Landover, was located at RFK. This week, there was significant legislation introduced into the Senate, well, actually more of the House of Representatives before the Senate, that is pretty moving towards gearing the team to get them to DC. One of the things that came out over the last couple of years through the Snyder era was a lot of DC council members, including the DC mayor, were against the team coming to RFK, or better yet, building a stadium in DC, therefore giving public funds to the Washington Commanders. The problem with that was that site then became off the table. As more investigations piled up, more accusations of hostile work environment, poor performing team, the list goes on and on and on. They quickly realized that Virginia was wavering on support, Maryland was wavering on support, as well as the district. So the team basically knows that there's not a chance of getting a new stadium deal until Snyder was out. So as I alluded to earlier, with the new ownership group coming in, a bipartisan bill, which is really actually kind of crazy to think about. In DC, which is predominantly Democratic, was sponsored by Representative Comer and Delegate Eleanor Norton Holmes. This legislation does twofold. It starts the process to get RFK back on the map as an option for the team, which is predominantly one of the primary locations where the team wants to go. This, number one, it gives the RFK a 99-year lease. Apparently, the lease on RFK is only about 5 to 10 years, but no owner for teams wants to construct a stadium and only have a 10-year lease, knowing that, hey, look, we're spending billions of dollars. That lease is not going to work for us. Number two, it rezones the property from RFK and the surrounding area. It takes it from strictly sports entertainment and rezones it into a mixed commercial, something like a mixed usage residential. Where does that come into play? A lot of times you see with new stadiums, it's not just the stadium that's being built. There's hotels, there's dining, there's shops, there's residential, kind of all mixed into one. And what that does is it brings in more money, not only for the jurisdiction that the new stadium is built in, however, it also brings in more money for the team as well, and kind of helps support that urban renewal development of that area, which we know RFK is definitely much needed. So that's going to be going to the House of Representatives here shortly, probably when they come back into session. DC insiders are saying that should pass relatively easy. It should also pass once it gets to the Senate. It's crazy that, a bill this simple, or even just a bill, in general, would pass as easy as it does, knowing our federal government. But it's all circumstance, right? But two things that come to mind here as we look at other options, or as we talk about other options, and Evan brings up a great point: why not Richmond? Probably one of the only reasons why not Richmond is that it's too far south. They try to keep the team either in Northern Virginia, the RFK. There's another site that they were talking about possibly in the last couple of weeks down by the Navy Yard at Nat Stadium, as well as possibly moving into Virginia or into Maryland. The options in Maryland are the current FedEx Field site, as well as there's a piece of property about a year ago. They're looking just north of MGM National Harbor, if you know where that is, located off of the BW Parkway. While Bethesda would probably even be an option for a site. Having working in Bethesda myself now for the last 12 to 13 years, there's not a lot of open area in Bethesda to accommodate a large stadium complex for an NFL team. They might be able to get away with putting training facilities in Bethesda, or like the headquarters or the front offices, so to speak. But there's not enough open land without tearing down buildings and houses and stuff like that to construct in Bethesda. So as it sits right now, with the pending legislation that fast tracks RFK back on the block for a stadium option, I see the options right now as RFK at number one, back to FedEx Field number two, and then somewhere another option, not the previously land bought down in Woodbridge, but another option that might pop up in Northern Virginia over in Loudoun County, over towards Commanders Park, as we know it in Ashburn. So we'll have to see what kind of happens there. And kind of keep an eye on what the new ownership group wants to do. You're absolutely right. There's still a huge fan base in Maryland. And a lot of that was, based, we had a lot of Maryland, a lot of Virginia, a lot of Delaware, and it's crazy to think even the amount of fans that are still alive and well in Southern Virginia and North Carolina before the Baltimore Ravens came in. Baltimore Ravens have a specific market in Maryland, and I don't think that, the two are really intertwined, right? So most of Maryland, basically like from PG County north, kind of like in that Maryland metro area, as well as kind of like central Maryland, are kind of like Ravens fans. The thing with us, and it's kind of unique situation. I actually live in South Central PA. I work in the metropolitan DC area. Kind of crazy, right? So a lot of people ask me, "Hey, why aren't you a Pittsburgh Steelers fan? Why aren't you a Philadelphia Eagles fan? Why aren't you a Baltimore Ravens fan?" And it's kind of just how I grew up. And the first team that kind of stuck with me, right, was the Washington Redskins from the 1980s because I was born in '79. However, it is really awesome that I can say that we have 4 NFL markets that I can get access to for games, for news, for anything else. And it's kind of pretty awesome to have that exposure to all these teams' markets. But as I alluded to earlier, training camp has started today. As it just so happened, today was the first day with pads on and Ashburn. So the guys were out hitting, the guys were out working, and with obviously not only pads today, but there is a huge new atmosphere out at training camp in Ashburn. What do I mean by that? The first and foremost, if any of you have seen pictures, snippets on Twitter or anything from NFL insiders or team insiders, one of the first things they did was construct bleachers and kind of like some covered suites up top. The bleachers alone, along with the suites, can accommodate up to 4,000 fans. Since day one of training camp last week, that area has been packed, as well as down along the fence, down along the ropes. They've been standing 3, 4 deep. Why is that such a huge turnaround? I went to training camp last year, 2 days, one towards the beginning, one towards the end. And honestly, sitting here speaking, there's maybe 1,000 people each day. I didn't go on the weekend, didn't go when it was a big day like membership day or fan appreciation or anything like that. Just 2 random days at training camp. And, it wasn't necessarily a complete ghost town, but it definitely wasn't the atmosphere of, completely energetic, rooting your team on, rooting your players on, and really being there for a really awesome fan experience. And that's one of the first things, Josh Harris literally just took over the team a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And while he was in Minnesota, him or one of the other owners, called somebody up and was like, "Hey, we got to get a bunch of bleachers out here to training camp. We got to get a bunch of tents. We got to get a bunch of food trucks. We got to get this. We got to get that." And looking at all the reports and, posts of fans on Facebook groups and this and that, it's nothing short of a complete 180 turnaround at training camp. But without, all the good things that happen in training camp, there's also bad things that happen at training camp. And one of those bad things happened last Friday. The Washington Commanders last year signed a new radio deal to do all their games on 101.3, I think it's Wash FM, out of DC. They were on 101, or they were on 106.7 The Fan for years, but they went to the iHeart Media Group, went through this radio station, and as luck would have it, the main head disc jockey in the morning show and his producer were out at training camp on Friday morning. Doesn't sound like a big deal. A lot of radio people, a lot of media personalities, a lot of TV sportscasters, the whole 9 yards. The only problem was this radio DJ by the name of Don Geronimo and his producer Crash decided that they were going to make some disparaging female comments directed at a female sportscaster, which they didn't know was a female sportscaster at the time, for Channel 9, which is one of the local DC sports, which was basically one of the local DC news stations. Consequently, Josh Harrison owners found out about it, barred the radio station from training camp that afternoon, as soon as morning practice ended. And it kind of went a step further. So then it kind of blew up, hey, what did he say? Why did he say it? Did he know that he was actually saying it? Did he know he was on the air? Blah, 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 blah. Then come Sunday afternoon, there was a press release put out by iHeartMedia that iHeartMedia, the parent company of 101.3 FM, the flagship station of the Commanders, had actually fired the disc jockey as well as the producer. And I think there was one other person as well, which kind of goes back to, some of the things that Josh Harris and other limited partners were saying during their opening press conferences, right? that, hey, look, this is a new era. This is a new culture. This is going to be a place that everybody is welcome. Everybody's going to be equal. There's going to be equality, you know, an open work environment, yada, yada, yada. The list goes on and on. Basically, we're turning the page from Dan Snyder, and, what was tolerated before is not going to be tolerated. And this is one of the first ways that the new ownership group said, hey, look, excuse me, this is what happened. This is how we feel about it. This is where we stand. You're gone. iHeart Media took that one step further and terminated the contract of those individuals. How much the team had to play in that as well, I'm not sure. But, it's just something that happened from training camp before. So kind of as we keep moving along into training camp, there's definitely a couple battles, so to speak. And I kind of use that term loosely because a lot of guys that come in for training camp are doing like they're kind of already projected, right? You're either already projected to make the team or you're going to be on the practice squad. You might get relegated by trade. There's always going to be some injuries, so you might find some spots for guys that sneak in and here and there. But for the most part, you kind of know where everybody's going to fall in line. Your starters are kind of your starters, so to speak. But for us, there's been a couple battles. We kind of talked about it a little bit last week that, there's a couple position groups that, they brought guys in to do some competition. One of which, we'll get it out of the way, talk about the kicker. They brought in Michael Badgley from Detroit. He also kicked with Chicago and the San Diego Chargers before. The thing about Badgley is Badgley was a perfect 44 for 44 on his extra points last year. However, the only problem was once he starts getting a little further out in the field goal range, then he gets a little more suspect. I think he only made like 75 to 80% of his field goals last year. The other problem with Badgley is Badgley's not a really good kickoff guy. Even though the NFL is changing the rules now that, we're starting in a different spot. There's different rules on how you can hit, how you can't wedge block, blah, 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 blah. It's there is an open competition for that kicking spot. And with Joey Sly, who's the current kicker, that we aren't really sure how, how that's going to work out. Do you waste the roster spot for an extra kicker? Is this going to challenge Joey Sly just to be better on the extra points? Because Joey Sly missed, I think it was like 5 or 6 extra points last year. And, when your offense last year doesn't produce the amount of points that you typically want or need, every extra point is, a valuable point. And that valuable point could possibly be the difference between a win and a loss. Or in our case last year, we went 8-1 with that tie. That tie might have been, 9-8 along with something else. One of the things that we will address later on here in the show is the name change and the petition that's going around. But we'll hit that in a little bit. One of the other 2 battles that we're kind of looking at for the team in training camp is twofold. And they're actually offensive minded, right? The defense is kind of set, so to speak. We all know, the defensive line is stout with, the 4 first-round draft picks. The first-round draft pick that we just spent this past year, or I should say this year, on Emmanuel Forbes, and, we're looking pretty good there. But the 2 battles that are and I'll use that term loosely, is kind of in the tight end round and, on the offensive line. More so left tackle, left guard between Charles Leno, Braden Daniels, Chris Paul, and Sadiq Charles. Those guys have been battling out so far. Yes, the first week of training camp didn't have pads. Yeah, it's a lot of conditioning. Yeah, there's not a lot of physicality and hitting. But one of the things that's coming out of training camp already so far is that Eric Bieniemy, the new offensive coordinator, is working these guys hard. The guys are basically, I don't want to say falling over because they're not quite to that point, but they've all noted in press conferences and interviews that, this is one of the hardest preseasons that they've had to work in their tenure with the team. And that's a really good thing because not only is EB going to condition them to be the good guys that can last, 4 quarters on the game, but he's holding them accountable, right? So, and there's been times already where if a lineman misses a block, isn't getting the assignment, or et cetera, he's calling them out. He's holding them accountable. He's making them do it over. And, it's making everybody better so that competition can exist for those positions. The other one is kind of a little bit of a battle, so to speak, is tight ends. We kind of already know that Logan Thomas is the tight end number one. But one of the things I learned in the last week is that Eric Bieniemy loves to run 2 and 3 tight end sets. Now, that's really good because we kind of look at what the Chiefs did over the last couple of years. Now, granted, we don't have any Travis Kelce's on our team, but we got a Logan Thomas. And if Logan Thomas can stay healthy, he's probably just a shade under Travis Kelce, which is really good. The problem is the next two guys, John Bates and Cole Turner, together make a Travis Kelce. Not individually, but kind of together, right? So John Bates is a really good blocker and somewhat good with his hands, had a good couple catches and even a touchdown or two last season. Cole Turner, on the other hand, is a really good receiver, but not necessarily a really good blocker. So the problem is going to be how these three guys can be utilized in Eric Bieniemy's new offensive system to help the offensive line and the offensive unit itself go through the play repertoire and put successful drives together going down the road. One of the things that is kind of cool to note that I read this past week is that we actually have like the third tallest tight end group in the NFL. I think the average height is literally like 6'6" between all four guys that are in camp for tight ends. So speaking of Eric Bieniemy, one of the things that's really cool, and I saw Dave mentioned, the question of how is Sam Howell looking? Sam Howell is looking really good right now. He's had more good days than bad days, but you kind of expected that there would be bad days kind of coming, right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, the guy is still a rookie. He played one game last year, week 18 against the Dallas Cowboys, had a decent showing, resulted in a victory. But, it's week 18. So were the Cowboys really putting their best effort forward? Were, the top guys for the Cowboys really playing in week 18 the entire game? Did Sam Howell get lucky? What's that look like? So to me, Sam Howell looks really good. Dude's got a freaking cannon. He's been hitting his receivers in stride, out in the flats, down, on the post routes, on the cross routes, whatever, that he's putting the ball where it needs to go. So right now he's showing all the signs that he's going to be the competent quarterback that we need this season. Is that going to, even though it's only training camp and there's not a lot of physicality, there's not a lot of broken pockets, there's not a lot of other things going on, is that going to translate into on the field success come week 1 against Arizona? That remains to be seen. Can Sam Howell have sustained long-term success as QB1 for the Commanders? That remains to be seen as well. To me personally, we can't make the decision on Sam Howell being the permanent QB1 until you kind of have that sample size of like 4 to 6 games minimum. So we had one game already. If we can get Sam Howell at least 2-2, 3-1 through the first quarter of the season, I think we'll be fine. And I think he's going to get a lot of confidence. He's going to have a lot of production, and we're going to see what happens. We're going to see what happens as we go. But Sam Howell so far is doing what he needs to do. He's saying what he needs to say. He's getting a little bit more personable. I did an autograph signing with Sam about 3 weeks ago. And quite honestly, the guy hardly said anything other than like, hey, hi, I'm Sam Howell, sign my name a couple hundred times. But, I think he's starting to come out of his shell. His last couple press conferences kind of showed that with a lot of the DC reporters and national reporters as well. So we'll see how that kind of keeps evolving. And he's still getting that relationship with his receivers as well as, the head coach, Eric Bieniemy, and some of the other guys on the staff. So we'll see how that goes. One of the things going into this season that a lot of fans are talking about, especially NFL insiders, is Coach Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera is one of the nicest guys in the NFL, but does that really translate into wins? Does it translate into playoff appearances? Does it translate into Super Bowl contention? That kind of remains to be seen, right? So Ron Rivera has been a head coach since 2011. He was in Carolina Panthers from 2011 to 2019, and a lot of the Commanders faithful, even non-faithful, are calling for Ron Rivera's head just because he hasn't done very well in DC over the last 3 years, the last 3 seasons. He's going into his fourth year now with the team, and but in Carolina he didn't do too bad, right? So he compiled records of 6-10, 7-9, 12-4, 7-8, 15-1. 6-10, 11-5, another winning record. But he did finish out his last 2 seasons at 7-9 and 5-7, respectively, right? But in those 8 seasons, Ron Rivera guided the Carolina Panthers to 5 playoff appearances, including a Super Bowl. They lost Super Bowl 50 behind Cam Newton, but they got there. So when I look at the big picture, that's not too shabby. The problem was he comes to DC, and like I said, this is his fourth season, but his record doesn't necessarily indicate the progress of the team on the field, so to speak, even though everybody looks at wins and losses. So his first year was 7-9, next year was 7-10, last year was 8-1. Doesn't sound very good, especially when we're finishing third, fourth in the division to a stacked Eagles team, a loaded Dallas Cowboys team, and flip a coin, depends on which New York Football Giants team you're going to get that season, and how they finish out the end of the season. Are they going to finish strong, or are they going to fall off over the last 4 to 5 games? So the bottom of the NFC East has kind of been us and the Giants over the last couple of years. The one thing I will give to Riverboat Ron, as a lot of people affectionately call him, is Ron has had to deal with so much shit over those last 4 seasons now that it's not funny. And it really does affect the head coach in so many capacities, because the head coach, who's basically the face of the franchise, is the one that's answering all the questions, about investigations, about this team debacle, how the team handled this, how the team blew this opportunity, this PR nightmare. Oh shit, there's another investigation. Now there's hearings on Capitol Hill for this, and stuff like that. So poor Ron can't focus on strictly football or on the field expectations and operations since he's come to DC. He's trying to change a culture, a losing culture, a horrible, toxic culture that started from the owner at the top down on the business side of things, as well as the operational side, and as well as the football side. Ron's made so many great strides on the team side as far as the football players. The worst part is we haven't necessarily had a loaded, talented team to reflect the changes that he's doing. So, now that we have the new Josh Harris group, and as Paul just alluded to, is he going to be different with different ownership? I feel that he is. There's no more investigations. The Beth Wilkinson report is not getting released. Okay, water under the bridge. Mary Jo White report was released. New owners coming in. New owners are making changes. New owners are evaluating not only the operations on the field from a football perspective, but operations off the side. Ron Rivera can now focus on being a football coach, focus on being hired to do, doing what he was hired to do, so to speak. So, is he on the hot seat? I'll say yes, because a lot of times new ownership wants their guys in place, right? So what does that mean? They want their GM, they want their head coach, they want their president, they want their, whatever title that, you want to throw out there for the team umbrella, is basically auditioning this entire season to keep their job. Now, what record is going to keep his job safe? That's a really good question. Can they afford to go 8-8 again this year? Well, 8-9, 9-8, since it's now an 18-week season. I don't think so. you look at, I think truly an honor in order to keep Ron around in a head coaching capacity, because there's been a lot of talk, is he going to go into kind of a team um, GM role or a consultant role with the team after this season? Who knows? That kind of remains to be seen. But I think in order for Ron to keep that position as head coach, kind of make that good impression on Josh Harris, Magic Johnson, Mitchell Rails, and all the other owners, he's going to have no less than 10 wins, which is a tall order when you look at our schedule. We're going to be doing a schedule preview probably next week or the week after, kind of as we get a little bit further into training camp. But, when you're playing in a stacked NFC East, it kind of was alluded to earlier, between the Eagles, the Cowboys, and the Giants, 2 games each, as well as some of the other teams that we're playing this year. We play Buffalo, we play the Jets, we play the Patriots, we play the Dolphins, and the list goes on and on. Trying to get 10 wins is going to be hard. And trying to get 10 wins is going to be a tall task. The team is definitely up for it, but it's all going to come back to what we just talked about in the training camp battles, so to speak, if you want to call it a battle. And how well is Sam Howell going to do? Can Sam Howell throw the rock and gunsling it around the field to, the top 4 wide receivers, throw in a little B-Rob and AG on the ground combo, and, we're on a hot streak to win? Who knows? It's gonna remain to be seen. But we'll see how Ron Rivera plays out throughout the season. I think if he starts like 1-3 in the first 4, or even worse over the first 6, you're going to see a lot of fans not only calling for another quarterback and Jacoby Brissett, who's basically coming in at QB number 2, but you're also going to see a lot of fans calling for Ron Rivera to be fired. Josh Harris typically doesn't have a track record of firing coaches mid-season, and I'm not a big fan of that either. Unless you get to the point where, you really don't have anything to play for, or you need that spark at the end of the season, it's going to be a tough call. Like, just hold your coaching staff till the end of the season. Black Monday comes, get rid of them. Is EB the coach that now the person that steps up to be the head coach? That kind of remains to be seen as well. But, it's just another evolving storyline as the season goes along. One of the things that was asked earlier is about the new name, rebranding. I'll tell you what, it's probably next to the stadium, next to training camp, and all the great changes that are going on, and the owners showing up at training camp, shaking hands, kissing babies, giving high fives, signing autographs, is the notion that the ownership is going to be going into a new name or a rebrand. The question is going to be, is that what's best? So one of the things that's going on right now, and you can't ignore it, right? But there's a petition out right now among all the Facebook groups of Washington Redskins. There's probably about 6 or 8 that I'm, a member of, basically just for Facebook fodder, that there's a petition going out right now to get the name Washington Redskins back. Josh Harris has come out and said, look, we're going to do what the fans want. Now, the question is going to be, how far do they take that in rebranding? A lot of fans are going to say, hey, look, we want the Washington Redskins name back. We want the logo back. We want the true burgundy and gold colors, not the cheesy uniforms that we got last season, etc. The problem's going to be the NFL and big-time sponsors have already made it known that that name is not going to be socially acceptable. Socially acceptable, business acceptable, whatever adjective or descriptive phrase you want to throw in there. There was a comment made by one of the Commander insiders, Ben Standig from The Athletic, the other day, that basically said, hey, look, this petition is great. It's getting voices heard. People are signing. Don't even know how many people in the DMV are actually signing it, as opposed to like national or international. But unless everybody that's signing that petition is bringing $10,000 with them, that petition is basically worthless. And he kind of makes a really good point, right? That even if the new ownership group goes to entertain this petition, which, by the way, as of like 5 o'clock this evening, that petition had garnered over 42,000 signatures, electronic signatures. I'll use that term loosely. Which is a decent amount of people. Let's not get that wrong. But is it enough to really sway the ownership group to say, hey, look, we are going to rebrand it and we're going to rebrand it back to the Washington Redskins? I don't see it happening. I see him possibly rebranding to something else, but not the Washington Redskins. I was like you, Paul. I grew up Redskins Cowboys. That was probably one of the, it's always ranked annually as one of the top rivalries in the NFL. Kind of like the Bears and the Packers and all these other groups. But Cowboys Redskins was always up there year after year. But due to sponsors, business, and even political pressure, because let's be honest, even though we're in one of the top 10 NFL markets in the country, we are in the biggest political market in the country. And, there is no bigger political market in the country than our nation's capital. And guess what? That's where our team is, and that's where they play. So we got to navigate that as well. I honestly think that the ownership is going to try and clean the slate of everything that was Dan Snyder touched, Dan Snyder era, Dan Snyder's hands-on, whatever you want to throw in there, that they want to wipe that clean, move on, new era, new culture, new team, new experience, the whole 9 yards, new expectations. So does that mean getting away from the Commanders? Probably. Is it going to be this season? No. Are they going to do it even next season? Maybe. I just don't see it happening going back to the Redskins, but I do anticipate probably another rebrand. And one of the guys that does a radio show for one of the DC stations has his own podcast, JP Finley, awesome dude to listen to, had the idea and notion that, Dan Snyder had his hands on the Redskins for something like 20 years. I mean, basically from 94 to 2020, so what, 26 years, that, if you really want to get rid of the Dan Snyder era, does that include moving away from the Washington Redskins? It's a valid point. They don't want to keep the Commanders. They don't want to go back to the Washington football team, which everybody knew was kind of an intern name and brand to begin with. So, does that mean that the Redskins are off the table too? I think we're kind of at the point where Redskins is off the table. Look, it was a great run. It was a great history. We won Super Bowls. We got a lot of Hall of Famers, a lot of great memories, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. But it's time to start a new era, start a new brand, do the rollout right, and build a team moving forward. So that's kind of where it stands with the new name rebranding. But trust me, something always pops up over week to week that kind of throws, another monkey wrench. And there's so many things coming out about new name, rebranding, that you spend so much time trying to figure out, is it fact? Is it fiction? Is it just what another person posted online? So you got to do a lot of due diligence and homework to see if you can validate where the information's coming from, who it came from. Did it come from one of the, either Josh Harris or one of the big five, as I call it, limited partners of the team? Or is it just hearsay from one of the groups just kind of pushing an agenda to get a reteam, kind of like that? And kind of do that. So it kind of remains to be seen. So one of the things that, as we talk about the season is, and it's not necessarily a position battle, but it's a pretty important position, is our defensive ends, or basically your edge rushers, right? And as it just popped up there, we got Chase Young. It's a make or break year. What do we mean by that? Well, as those of you who know or don't know, Chase Young is now entering his fourth season with the Washington Commanders. He was the number 2 overall draft pick in 2020 out of Ohio State. Washington Commanders actually select him. It's kind of interesting to look back and do whole what ifs or whatever. Washington Commanders actually took Chase Young over Justin Herbert, who's now the highest paid player with that deal that he signed last week with the San Diego, the Los Angeles Chargers. So a lot of fans, especially since Chase Young got hurt with his ACL injury a season and a half ago, have been, what if we would have took Justin Herbert? Like how much better we would have been, Yeah, it probably would have looked great, but we can what if all the time. But what it comes down to now is Chase Young, Montez Sweat are on the last years of their rookie deals. The Washington Commanders have already came out this season and said, "Hey, look, Chase and Montez, we're not doing your 5th-year options. We just gave 2 years ago, we gave a boatload of money to John Allen, defensive tackle, former first-round pick. Last year, this past season, we gave a little bit more money, huge truckload of money, to Deron Payne, another first-round defensive lineman out of Alabama as well. And, so now it comes to the point of, can they pay Montez Sweat and Chase Young? I don't think they can pay them both. So it's going to come down to who has the better season. I think Chase Young is going to have a breakout season. He's going to have a breakout year. But the problem is going to be, what happens if Montez Sweat balls out again like he did last year? The guy was amazing and a menace on the edge outside of Allen and Payne on the inside. So one of the things that kind of leads Chase Young maybe to have a little bit of an edge over Montez Sweat is Chase Young is a pretty big fan favorite. Even with the knee injury last year and only playing, missing 10 games 2 years ago when he got hurt in October and then only coming back to the last 3 games last year, he's still one of the fan favorites. And with all the new people going to training camp this year, that was pretty evident. A lot of people asking for his autograph, a lot of people asking to shake his hand, high fives. There was one day, I think it was Saturday at Fan Appreciation Day, training camp, Chase wouldn't sign autographs for the first half, at the beginning, but he went down the line literally in high fives every single fan that was along the fence row. And even to the point that, they were going into the special teams practice at the end of practice, morning practice, and they wanted to get a lot of fan noise cheering rather, they were piping it into the speakers. Okay. Yeah. But they also wanted, the 10,000 people there to make some noise. So Ron Rivera walks over to Chase Young and says, "Hey, dude, I need you to get the crowd amped up. Whatever you need to do, go do it." So Chase Young is like, "Yeah, sure. Absolutely." So Chase Young does, hey, let's get loud, let's get rowdy. Fans start cheering, whatever. And Chase Young's like, "Man, that's not enough." So Chase Young grabs a football, walks out and starts kicking field goals. They're probably only like 15, 20 yarders or whatever. Don't even know how many he made. Don't even care if he made any. But all the fans in attendance thought that was the greatest thing in the world. So he has that unique ability to connect with the fans, even though he hasn't been on the field consistently over the last 2 years. So, then it's going to be, is he going to have a breakout season to warrant a long-term contract and get paid? Is he going to have a mediocre season that, okay, we feel good about having him around, so we're going to franchise tag him next, at the end of this coming season, going into 2024. And I'm not sure how much the franchise tag would be for defensive end edge rushers, so I don't know that figure off the top of my head. And then what do we do with Montez Sweat, going in? But, when you look at Chase Young, as I said, he was picked number 2 overall in 2020. He played 15 games in his rookie season. And at the end of his rookie season, he played well enough that he was awarded Defensive Rookie of the Year. And in that rookie season, he had 30 solo tackles. He had 44 combined tackles, 4 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, a touchdown, and 7.5 sacks. And I think that last number, 7.5, is where, this, I don't want to say the ceiling, but where the floor starts for Chase Young, right? And thank you, Paul. So the franchise tag this year would be 19.7 million for defensive ends. So you figure it's probably going to go up about 5 to 10% next season. So you're probably easily looking at like 20, 21 million for the franchise tag if you try to do it. But then you also have to keep in mind, okay, so if you franchise tag him, one of 2 things can happen. Well, actually, I guess one of 3. You either sign him to a long-term deal, you pay him a bunch of money that you may or may not be able to afford. You franchise tag him a second time, and we saw what happened with Kirk Cousins when we franchise tagged him a second time. the guy walked and we didn't get any compensation after that. Or 3, the guy walks after that year and you end up with no compensation whatsoever. So it's going to be a dicey game to figure out what happens, with Chase Young. But what expectations do you put on him, knowing that, what's going to be a make it or break it season? What's going to be a breakout year? I think he can't get out of bed and come play football and go to the stadium for less than 6.5 sacks a season. Like that. Guys get out of bed and come and go and say, "Hey, look, I'm doing 6.5 sacks minimum." 7.5 got him Defensive Rookie of the Year. To me personally, he's going to need at least 10 to even get considered for a long-term extension. And you're absolutely right that, Payne, Allen, Sweat, and Young probably, because I don't know if there's another one, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody out there in listening land, but they could be the first 4 defensive line close to or over 100 million a year. I know back in the day, it wasn't 100 million a year, obviously, but combined, but, we signed one of the worst, fantasy football-ish picks that Dan Snyder made. We did Albert Haynesworth. We made him the first $100 million player in NFL history. So it kind of goes back to that. If you pay all these guys this money, are they going to produce? Chase Young needs 10 sacks in order to get that long-term contract. Chase Young needs to be available. Chase Young has to play at least 15 games this season to have that breakout year. Chase Young is going to need at least, let's be honest, probably close to 50 tackles. Now, the other thing that you can bring into consideration is he might not have the 15 sacks, the 12 sacks, the high-profile sacks, like a T.J. Watt, Myles Garrett, or some of the other guys, Aaron Donald, that you would expect. But is him being, a lot of times, and this happened kind of late in the season a little bit last year, but more so 2 years ago before he got hurt, his production wasn't as high because he was getting double and triple teamed. And where that allowed things to progress was, they're throwing 2 guys to try and stop Chase Young. And guess what? Deron Payne's getting a sack. Jonathan Allen's getting a quarterback rush, getting a hurried, incomplete pass, getting a batted ball. So when you have guys, across the front, Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, throw in Mathis, as a little rotation in defensive tackle, as well as Chase Young, that basically is a recipe for disaster for most offensive lines, NFL quarterbacks, because they can account for 1, they can account for 2. Most of them can't account for all 4. So, I feel that he's going to have the breakout season. He's going to put some numbers up that, are going to rival, if not be better than his Defensive Rookie of the Year campaign in 2020. So I think Chase Young's going to have a good season. The knee brace is off. He said he feels healthy. He said that's kind of the next step in the progression of rehab is getting the brace off. I think he went the first 1, maybe 2 days with the brace on. And then after that, the next morning, bam, it was gone. Everybody's like, holy shit, there's no brace. He didn't have a brace on. Logan Thomas didn't have a brace on. There was somebody else. So all 3 of those guys were kind of significant because they had knee injuries last year. Let's be honest, wearing those big, bulky braces on the knees or the legs can hamper a lot of mobility, a lot of techniques, which kind of ultimately results in poor or lower production. One of the other things that's kind of promising about Chase Young possibly having that breakout season as he looks to, have a contract year or possibly, go out of DC and get that money bag somewhere else. Chase Young went back, I think it was about a month ago, and did a couple-day weekend workout with his former line coach from Ohio State, Larry Johnson. A lot of guys would consider him, one of the best college line coaches in college football. And what was even of pretty significant note to that was not only did Chase Young go back to OSU and do a multi-day workout with Coach Johnson, kind of get back to the basics, get back to figuring out his technique, what made him, the number 2 overall pick and the Defensive Rookie of the Year. Montez Sweat went with him. So, anytime that you can get those guys connected together, whether it's position groups or, like-minded defensive guys, offensive guys together, it means nothing but good things. Where does that also come into play? We're going to switch gears real quick, not just as a side note. Sam Howell did that exact same thing with his wide receivers and running backs. Got them all together for a week in Florida, down in Fort Lauderdale, just to get to know the guys, but then to run routes, throw passes, have film meetings, do this, do that. Excuse me. So guys on the team are taking advantage of that. And I think it's only going to help in production. One of the things that, as we look, forward to this season, we have the talent to do great things. This front four on the defense is what's going to be driving the defense, right? So they are probably one of the most underrated and, I guess you could say, misrespected units in the NFL, especially in the NFC. But if they can produce like their potential, if they can produce like they show on paper, they're going to be a force to reckon with. And where that comes into play as it takes a lot of pressure off the secondary, especially, the rookies and Emmanuel Forbes and, he's not a rookie anymore, but Cam Curl and Kendall Fuller and those guys, as we basically, it's, a pass happy league as we face these prolific offenses, especially in our own division. When you're going against quarterbacks 2 times a season and Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, and Daniel Jones, it's got to be a complete package. It's got to be a total team effort, and it's got to be a total unit effort of that defense. And it's going to start with the front four. So last but not least, as we kind of wind down the show and kind of gear things up, one of the things that, training camp always brings is that whole depth chart, right? Depth charts are usually kind of cool to look at. Like I said at the beginning of the show, you kind of have some things set. You kind of know your starters are going to fall in line, the popular players on the team, et cetera, so to speak. Right now, and kind of as Dave alluded to at the very beginning, asking how does Sam Howell look in camp? Sam Howell looks pretty good. Sam Howell's getting the majority of the QB1 reps, probably 90% of them, in all honesty, if not 100%. And that's not really a fluke. It's actually kind of by design. To get him acclimated, comfortable, confident in EB's new system with the new offensive coordinator. We've had Scott Turner for the last 3 seasons. So, even though this is only Howell's second season, it's now going to be his second offensive coordinator. So one of the things that's kind of cool, I listened to a press conference from Sam Howell the other day. One of the reporters asked him, hey, are you going to be running more RPO in EB's offense? And how do you feel doing that compared to Scott Turner's offense from last season? And Sam Howell gave a really good response, right? He's like, look, one of the things that we did, and I feel that I did very well at the collegiate level, was we ran a high-profile, prolific RPO offense at Carolina. Now, I get it. Carolina isn't a powerhouse football team. It's not one of the SEC powerhouses or, Big Ten or Pac-12 or even Big 12, schools. They're kind of like in the middle, right? But if it's the same terminology, same concepts, same, route, same kind of configurations, it only helps you when your new offensive coordinator comes over to you and says, "Hey, look, we're going to run, more of a passing offense. We're going to throw in some 2 to 3 tight end sets. We're going to sprinkle in some running game. We're going to use our running backs in the passing game. And oh, by the way, we're going to do a lot more RPO than what we did last year, which hopefully, opens you up to, a better, more sustained drives, less 3 and outs, blah, 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 blah." And, that can only make Sam Howell better. So kind of going along with that, then we know that Jacoby Brissett, who's brought in for that veteran presence, is kind of a QB2. For the wide receivers on offense, we kind of know the top 4, especially the top 3, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel. From there, this is where it gets a little interesting, because you would expect Diami Brown, who's been on the team for 2 years now, to kind of step up and go into basically wide receiver number 4. Him and Howell played college ball at Carolina together. So I think that's definitely going to help him out. The problem is Diami Brown doesn't necessarily get on the field as much as you would like. And last season, especially, somewhat to no fault of his own, he didn't really get the production that he needed. So is he going to get it or not? That's kind of remain to be seen. But then, it kind of gets interesting from there that, for wide receivers, we brought in Byron Pringle, who played 3 seasons with Kansas City, knows EB, knows EB's offense, knows the terminology, knows the concepts. And it's just kind of a matter of plugging and playing and, getting that cohesion with another quarterback. So I think Pringle makes the team as well. They're probably going to keep at least 6, maybe 7 wide receivers, because a lot of times some of our wide receivers also do special team duty, whether it's being on special teams itself or punt return, kick return, which kind of goes into the next batch that Casimir Allen and Dax Milne both made a team last year. Milne was predominantly on as a depth chart wide receiver, specialty package, like if they went 4 wide, 5 wide, Hail Marys, whatever. But he did a lot of return work. So whether or not he's going to remain in the mix, Casimir Allen kind of the same way. I see him maybe bumping Milne if depending on how their camp production goes. Running backs real quick. It's basically going to be the same thunder and lightning combination we had last year in Brian Robinson. As you remember, the guy who early on in the season got shot as a result of a carjacking in downtown DC, missed a couple weeks, as well as the veteran Antonio Gibson, AG. AG actually started as a wide receiver many moons ago, played some wide receiver in college, converted to running back. Struggled a little bit with fumbleitis and ball control as a running back. But one of the things that they talked about, and EB has even talked about this in his press conferences, as trying to get AG in as a running back into more of a running back receiver concept into the offense. So not necessarily doing as many rushes, going to be more of a third down back, going to be more of a slot running back receiver on second down if needed, that kind of deal. So I think you're going to see a lot more of AG lined out from the running back spot, but kind of still capable to do running back stuff. As always, I don't think you're going to see any shortage of Curtis Samuel running back plays. Curtis Samuel is kind of like I call the Debo Samuel 2.0. He's running sweeps. They put him in motion, which EB is known for. EB runs a lot of multiple formations, a lot of back motions, a lot of crisscrosses, zags, basically like a cross Atlantic, cross Pacific, or just, to the tight end and out. A lot of try to get those mismatches for skilled positions on the defense, or kind of isolate into man coverage, or kind of at least dictate early on to the quarterback, hey, we're in zone, we're in man. These are the coverages that I got. But, EB brings a lot of that to the table in his offense with, one of the things that Travis Kelce and a couple other guys, and even Byron Pringle, one of his first press conferences was, EB has probably one of the most formation charts in the NFL as a coordinator, just from what he can choose from. Him and Andy Reid were picking this formation, this motion, whatever. And you kind of saw that with Patrick Mahomes last year, or actually even the last 2 or 3 seasons, right? And what he did with the offense in Kansas City. And I think you're going to continue to see that just transported over into DC. Kind of winding out the offense. You're kind of looking at center. Nick Gates, they brought him in free agency this year. He got hurt early on in the beginning of training camp. I think like an ankle thing, but I'm pretty sure he's back already. He's penciled in as the starting center. We drafted Ricky Stromberg like 3rd or 4th round. I think he makes the team kind of more for depth. We moved Sam Cosby to right guard, and we still have Andrew Wiley, Cornelius Lucas in there as well. We got rid of Andrew Norwell, more of a cap casualty than anything. He wasn't the most productive lineman, but he gave us 16 games last year. So it's kind of weird. Like, what were you really looking for out of him? to not keep him other than just a cap casualty. On the left side, which is obviously the most important, I kind of wish we still had Trent Williams over there. Excuse me, but it is what it is, right? So we got Chris Paul, Sadiq Charles, Charles Leno, and Braden Daniels. 3 out of 4 of those guys in the last 3 to 4 days, because they had off on Sunday, have done pretty decent to well against the front 4 that we just talked about a couple minutes ago in Allen, Payne, Sweat, and Young. So, there's what better way to get better as an offensive line unit than to go against those 4 cats in training camp, basically every day and 11 on 11s. It's kind of a win-win for the team. So, there's definitely going to be some more flip-flopping kind of guys rising, stock lowering as we progress into the second week of camp. As I alluded to earlier, we started pads today. I'm not sure of the specific date. I think it's sometime this week, Thursday, Friday, maybe. We start inter camp practices with the New England Patriots. It's kind of something that I don't think we did last year. We did the year before. Sometimes we've done it with the Baltimore Ravens. I think they did it a year, maybe even before Ron Rivera, with the Patriots. But we're back to doing inter camp practices with the Patriots for like 2 days, might even be 3. But I'm not sure the exact dates, but those guys are coming to town. So it's kind of interesting that, the thought process from a fan's perspective or a coach's perspective, does the team, is that a benefit, to going against another team, another set of guys? Is it, are you going to benefit? Is it going to be something fresh, to go against, since you're not going against the same linemen all the time or the same DBs or, the opposite position group that normally you're going against? And, I see that as a benefit to our guys, especially. Hopefully it gives them some real life experience, so to speak, putting EB's playbook into action. I know they're not going too far down in the playbook. And, Paul, you make a great point that, it probably will be really vanilla, right? Basic running plays, basic, passing plays, or we're going to show our hand a lot in what we're doing. We're not going to be running trick plays. Might not even get all the motion involved and all that good stuff, but it's probably just going to be, the down and dirty, pre-scripted, 20, 30 plays that gets us into training camp before the first preseason game. So, but there's, like I said, there's no shortage of stuff going on at camp. Next week's show will probably be just as much information and going on as, this week. It's just a matter of everything being updated. I have to agree that now that Mathis is healthy, he got hurt last year, missed, I think, like a third to half the season. One of the things that made the D-line so successful last season, but even more successful in 2021, was rotation of those guys. Now, obviously, Mathis wasn't on the team in 2021, but they had Matt Ioannidis and like 2 or 3 other solid B group guys that, they could literally throw, Jonathan Allen could come off the field. They throw Matt Ioannidis in, or one of the other guys in, and the production was still just as cohesive and productive as if, your top line guys were in. So it's kind of that seamless transition between and rotating to keep guys healthy and on the field. Now, the other thing that's going to help out is hopefully with our secondary being a little more experienced, being a little more aggressive, getting that first round draft pick in. We can eliminate, hey, we're going to be getting a lot more 3 and outs. We're going to be getting a couple more turnovers. We're going to be doing this, that we can get off the field, get the other team the punt, put the offense back on the field. Hopefully we're not doing 3 and outs, and we're getting some long sustained drives that our defense can rest and be healthy, unlike a lot of last season. So with that being said, we're going to wrap up our show. We got a couple sponsors just to hit real quick. Starting next week for us, we will be Out of the Box Sports. We'll be sponsored by Dugout Mugs, the ultimate game day mug. These are actually pretty cool. So for those of you that don't know, give you the short version. They take baseball bats, kind of cut them down, hollow them out, slap a logo, slap some pictures, whatever you want. They basically customize them, and you can make them mugs. You can get shot glasses. It's actually really cool stuff. So you can use promo code OOTB Sports 20 at dugoutmugs.com for your discount on behalf of us. And for those of you that are coffee drinkers, there's new flavors: bourbon, chocolate chip, and toasted coconut rum. You can use promo code, same thing, OOTBS Sports at monkeycultcoffee.com for your coffee flavors there as well. And also, not only do we have the Commander's Gridiron every Tuesday night at 6:30, but there is a show for everybody. Majority of the people around here in this area are some form of an NFC East football fan. We got shows for you for the Eagles, the Giants, the Cowboys. We do pregame and postgame shows on Sunday this season as well. We have wrestling shows. We have college football. We got Vegas scenes. We got Notre Dame Irish. We got all kinds of stuff. So look at our list, find the day, find the show that tickles your fancy, and listen in. Give them a listen. Give them a view. As always, you don't need to watch them live. You can take the link, jump back on a day after, and listen to them. So that way you don't miss any of the exciting news for your team. And with that, I'm going to sign off for tonight, and I will see you all next week. Thank you.